As a fast boy, fast man, who has dedicated much of my existence to the sport of motorcycling, it is time to come kneel before the ghost of Soichiro Honda and pay respect to the bike that changed motorcycling forever. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I am talking about the Honda Cb750. If someone were to travel back to the mid-1960s and stop Honda from developing the Cb750, riders today could still very well be limited to big loping American V-twins or small displacement British twin motorcycles that were standard of the time. That means no cool fast bikes with big spicy inline 4-cylinder engines putting down those crazy power numbers. That means that people on the internet love to argue over them, and it likely means no Turbo Hayabusa either. That's not the world you want to live in, is it? It wasn't until Honda released the Cb750 in 1969 that riders across the world were able to have a fast, amenable, and reliable motorcycle that cost nearly half of what the competitors at the time were charging. Anyone who drags knee on a highway on-ramp or has dropped a couple grand into their 40-year-old cafe racer build owes a degree of gratitude to Honda and the Cb750 for developing the first production supersport motorcycle that not only created a new industry standard for capability and performance, but changed the culture of motorcycling in America and throughout the world. So go ahead and put on your anime pajamas. You're going to want to get comfortable for this deep dive on the Honda Cb750. By the way, this video is sponsored by us. We'll talk about all the lovely benefits later on in the show. Soichiro Honda began manufacturing motorized bicycles in 1949 while taking advantage of the surplus 50cc two-stroke generator engines that were left over from World War II. When the supply of surplus engines ran out, Honda began manufacturing their own engines and complete motorcycles before ultimately becoming the leading manufacturer in Japan by 1959. By the mid-1960s, following the success of the Honda Nice campaign, which aims to change the association many Americans had created between motorcycles and the bad boy counterculture identity movies like The Wild One created, Honda wanted to further solidify their place in the American market by offering a motorcycle that any manufacturer had yet to fully execute. See, even before Sons of Anarchy people wanted to cosplay as leather-clad anti-heroes on two wheels, while Honda's smaller displacement motorcycles were popular in the dense urban areas they were accustomed to marketing to, they weren't really well suited for the North American landscape with big winding open roads that necessitated a larger, more powerful motorcycle. The 450cc twin-cylinder CB450s they were producing at the time just didn't really hold up to the competition. Honda had success building more powerful motorcycles at the racetrack in the late 1960s, but found that a high-revving nature of those engines would not compete well with the torquey, low-revving V-twin engines found in motorcycles from Indian and Harley-Davidson. In order for Honda to increase usable power without revving the engine to the moon, they had to increase the displacement. Thus, the 736cc inline 4-cylinder Cb750 was born. The Cb750 from Honda debuted at the Tokyo Auto Show in November of 1968 before being publicly launched into the following year. The CB had an industry-leading single overhead cam 736cc inline 4 engine that produced 67 horsepower and 44 foot-pounds of torque with an over-the-top speed of 120 miles per hour. Better than some Royal Enfield numbers nowadays. While the inline 4 engine is the most common configuration for a sport bike engine today, at the time Honda was the first to use that style in a production motorcycle and made available to the public. The Cb750 had a standard and amenable upright seating position with mid-mounted foot pegs, a big flat seat, and pulled back handlebars. It also had the most advanced tech package of any motorcycle at the time with an electric starter, flashing turn signals, front disc brake, and an attractive gauge cluster, all while coming in at the low price of $1,450. Adjusted for inflation, that would cost a little less than $11,500 today, which is still a pretty reasonable price tag for what was a top-of-the-line motorcycle. The Cb750 left such an impact on the industry that a new moniker had to be coined to identify it. The term superbike was determined to be the most fitting by motorcycle journalists at the time. The CB was so impressive that Kawasaki pushed the release of its Z1900, originally prototyped with a similar 750cc engine, to 1972 in order to increase the displacement to 903 cc's in an attempt to outperform Honda. Upon its debut, the Z1900 was making 81 horsepower and 54 foot-pounds of torque, and with that, a new standard for motorcyclists was established. Suzuki and Yamaha each wanted a piece of the pie and released their respective inline 4 models a few years later, and the term UJM, a Universal Japanese Motorcycle, was established by motorcycle journalists as a way to refer to this new style of motorcycle that was beginning to dominate the market. Speaking of UJMs, have you seen the new Kawasaki Z900 RS we have in the shop as our latest intermediate bike giveaway? It's a direct descendant of the Japanese superbikes from the 1970s. The Z900 is a modern, amenable, neo-retro motorcycle that can be yours for the low price of free. All you have to do is go to yamanube.co and sign up to join our Facebook community, and you will be entered to win all of our giveaway bikes. Members get exclusive content, access to our Discord server, and discounts on gear at shop.yamanube.co. Our community members have a direct influence on our content by being involved in challenges and contests, and are even able to call in and chat during certain segments of the Yamcast. I'm also doing a 30-minute live stream every Monday with our members over there as well. Doesn't that sound nice? Join below at yamanube.co. Honda sold over 400,000 models while the CB750 was in production from 1969 through 2003. That is a long production window. During that time, the CB had seen quite a few iterations and updates, though liquid cooling and rear disc brakes never did make an appearance. In 1976, they released the CB750A Honda-matic, which featured a 2-speed semi-automatic transmission where the rider switched between 2 gears without the use of a clutch. The engine was significantly detuned with decreased compression ratio and smaller carburetors. An interesting effort, the Honda-matic was discontinued in 1978, but was a clear predecessor to the motorcycles Honda currently manufactures with their DCT automatic transmissions. The CB750 engine was revamped in 1978, where Honda increased the displacement to 748 cc's and changed from a single to dual overhead cams. The CB750 Nighthawk debuted in 1982 and was produced somewhat intermittently until 2003. The Nighthawk had a slightly sportier styling and increased the power output to 75 horsepower and 47 foot-pounds of torque, while weighing in only at 463 pounds by the time of its discontinuance. The Nighthawk became its own line of motorcycles from Honda, offering displacements from 250 to 750 cc's. Honda ultimately began investing more of their resources into developing larger displacement successors like the CB900F. Honda began selling the CB900F in the United States in 1981 and 1982 to compete with the bigger, more powerful UJM counterparts like the Kawasaki KZ1000 and the Suzuki GS1000, and the Yamaha XS1100. It increased the displacement from 748 to 901 cc's, and the result put down 95 horsepower and 57 foot-pounds of torque while being tuned for a usable mid-range power rather than peak horsepower. It had dual disc brakes in the front and a single disc brake in the rear, updated air-assisted fork, and adjustable rear suspension. It was discontinued in 1983 before ultimately being brought back in 2001 as the Hornet, but more on that later. In 1983, they released the CB1100F, based in part on the CB1100R sport bike. That made 108 horsepower and had a top speed of 140 miles per hour before being discontinued in 1984. The CB750 Nighthawk remained the reigning standard of inline-4 motorcycle from Honda until the remainder of the 80s and 90s. From 1992 until 1996, although only available in America in 1994-95, Honda made the CB1000, a liquid-cooled 998cc inline 4-cylinder standard naked motorcycle and a clear predecessor to the CB1300. The CB1300 has a 1284cc inline 4 engine and has been in production since 1998 and is still available in certain non-American markets today. With the popularity of fully fared sport bikes in the 90s, it wasn't until 2001 when Honda brought back the CB900F, then dubbed the Hornet. They had consistently available large displacement 4-cylinder standard bikes since the Nighthawk. The Hornet was a cool update for the class from Honda. It featured a 919cc liquid-cooled fuel-injected engine that makes 109 horsepower and 67 foot-pounds of torque. The Hornet is a really sharp bike, and hey, you may have seen the nice and newly made over model we have in our shop, and an important entry for Honda as they were to bridge the gap between vintage air-cooled motorcycles and modern inline 4 naked bikes that we are familiar with today. That brings us to the CB1000R, a motorcycle that came out in 2008 to replace the Honda 919 and is currently still in production. It has a detuned 998cc engine derived from the CBR1000RR, which makes just 143 horsepower and 77 foot-pounds of torque. It has all the bells and whistles like adjustable suspension, 4-piston caliper brakes, and a quick shifter, all in an upright and amenable seating position akin to its UJM heritage. Honda made the CB1100 from 2010 until 2022. For a modern bike, it had the most authentic UJM styling and a clear homage to the CB750 with its air-cooled engine and rear dual shocks. It had an 1140cc air-cooled 4-cylinder engine, a 6-speed gearbox, LED lighting, and semi-adjustable suspension. Okay, so if there's so many bikes that have been developed by Honda, not to mention other manufacturers since the introduction of the CB750 more than 50 years ago, then why is the CB750 still so popular? You can see one pop up pretty regularly on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace for just a couple grand. Considering the amount of motorcycles Honda produce and the build quality and reliability that are known for, there are still plenty of roadworthy CB750s on the used market to this day. It's not uncommon for these bikes to see upwards of 40,000 miles with little troubles aside from the standard maintenance necessary to keep a 45-year-old bike running on the road. For riders who enjoy wrenching on their bikes as much as you do riding, or a diehard fan of all things old, heavy, and air-cooled, the Honda CB750 is likely one of the most popular platforms for cafe racer style motorcycle builds. As a result, there is plenty of aftermarket support from companies who design and make parts specifically for older UJM bikes. The impact the Honda CB750 had on the motorcycle industry extends far beyond the reaches of the original UJM era, cafe racer builds, or Honda's own line of inline 4 motorcycles. Of course, the aesthetic influence can still be seen in the neo-retro style of naked bikes that emulate the UJM cafe style of the day. Bikes like the Kawasaki Z900RS we have in the shop and the XSR 900 from Yamaha are a perfect example with their standard upright seating positions, flat gas tanks, wide handlebars, and sporty engines. As the retro and cafe style of bikes have continued to gain in popularity in recent years, they've become staple offerings for many manufacturers. These manufacturers capitalize the emotional value of nostalgia and vintage aesthetics similarly to Harley or Triumph, but while still offering contemporary components and performance at an accessible price point. In totality, the CB750 was imperative in creating the expectation for road use production motorcycles to be performance-oriented in a way that had not previously been reserved for motorcycles at the track. Without it, we would not have the incredibly high-performing production motorcycles that have been released since its inception. Not to mention all the ultra-cool names from the 80s and 90s, the Hurricane and the Fireblade from Honda, the Ninja and the Tomcat from Kawasaki, and of course, the Hayabusa from Suzuki. The Honda CB750 literally changed the entire trajectory of motorcycling when it was released in 1969 as the original superbike. So maybe the next time you see a bearded flannel-clad CB750 cafe bro, instead of ridiculing his drum brake and oil leaks, take a minute to appreciate the way in which his bike helped shift the motorcycling paradigm 53 years ago. Fact: tablecloths were originally designed to be used as a large communal napkin. When they were first invented, diners were meant to wipe off their hands and faces on a tablecloth after eating a messy meal. That is disgusting. Goodbye. Well, look at you. You've made it to the end of another Yami Noob video. You should consider yourself pretty lucky because I have curated this one right over here for you to continue watching. It's probably just as good as the one you just saw. Unless you hated the one you just saw. I don't know, maybe leave me a comment down below about how much you hated it as well too. Or just keep watching this one. Make sure you keep watching Yami Noob. Don't forget to keep watching Yami Noob. That's the most important thing. Keep watching Yami Noob.